Back in the racially charged landscape of the 1950s, my mother, a young white woman named Claire, was caught in a forbidden love with my father, a black man named Marcus. After her family discovered their secret, she was violently forced into a marriage with a man chosen for her. What followed was not just a story of escaping abuse, but a desperate cross-country journey for survival. Fueled by a love that refused to be extinguished and a hope for a future where their child, me, could simply exist without fear. This is the story of their fight. It all began in a small, segregated town where the lines between black and white were drawn as rigidly as the railroad tracks that divided the two communities. One sweltering afternoon, Claire's family caught her sharing a chaste, innocent kiss with Marcus behind the old town church. The backlash was immediate and brutal. That night, her father and older brothers dragged Marcus from his home and into the dusty street. They beat him viciously, their fists and their words fueled by a venomous generational hatred, shouting about the sanctity of keeping their bloodline pure. Within a single, terrifying week, they had forced Claire to marry a man named Henry, the church's golden boy, a man everyone in their small, white community believed was destined for greatness. But the public image of Henry as the perfect, devout husband was a carefully constructed lie. Behind the closed doors of their new home, he was a monster. He would hit Claire if she burned the dinner, his rage a sudden violent storm, and then, hours later, smile proudly with his arm around her at the Sunday morning service. People in town called him a saint, a pillar of the community. When Claire, her face bruised and her spirit broken, tried to confide in her own mother, showing her the ugly, purple marks blooming on her skin, she was simply told to be a better. Henry also asserted what he called his rights as her husband, every single night, a brutal, loveless act that left Claire feeling hollowed out and dead inside. She couldn't take it anymore. In a desperate act of rebellion, she found out where Marcus worked, at the local lumber mill, and waited for hours near the small grocery store he frequented after his shifts. When he finally saw her, his eyes widened not with love but with fear. Her family, after the initial beating, had paid other men to continue the torment, warning Marcus and his family to leave town or face far worse. But Claire begged him, her words a torrent of pain and desperation, to meet her in the old cemetery at the edge of town. There, hiding among the tombstones of generations past, they started a new secret courtship, hiding letters for each other under the weathered stones. She told him everything: the beatings from Henry, the nightly abuse, the suffocating, soul-crushing despair of her new life. In turn, Marcus told her how her parents had launched a vicious smear campaign after the incident, spreading lies about black men being inherently dangerous to justify their own violence, and how they had lied directly to her, telling her that Marcus had abandoned her by choice, that he had never truly loved her. Through those fragile, tear-stained letters, they fell in love all over again. Sometimes, on nights when Henry had passed out in a drunken stupor, Marcus would risk everything to sneak to her window, just to hold her hand through the thin mesh of the screen for a few precious, silent moments. They came up with a desperate, dangerous plan. If Claire were to become pregnant, Henry might temper his violence to protect her, and Marcus would use the 9 long months of her pregnancy to save every penny he could so they could finally run away together. So, on nights when Henry was too drunk to notice or care, Marcus would sneak into the house, and they would desperately, hopefully try to conceive a child, a tiny symbol of a future they were trying to build in the darkness. A few weeks later, Claire found out she was pregnant. As they had hoped, Henry stopped forcing himself on her. But the violence, the rage did not stop. He started slamming her into walls, pulling her hair until clumps came out in his fists, and throwing things at her, always careful to avoid her growing stomach. He made her wear baggy, shapeless clothes to church to hide the new bruises, then would smile with a proud, paternal glow as the other parishioners congratulated him on his impending fatherhood. Then, when Claire was 8 months pregnant, Marcus disappeared. He wasn't at the store. He wasn't at the mill. There were no new letters under the gravestones. Nothing. With just 1 month until the baby was due, their entire fragile plan was falling apart. A cold, terrifying panic seized Claire. Had her parents found out? Had something terrible happened to Marcus? She couldn't go looking for him without raising suspicion, without putting herself and the baby in even greater danger. All she could do was wait. Her body Henry's abuse escalated, and her once bright hope of escaping began to fade into a dim, distant flicker. The moment I was born, everything changed. The delivery room, which had been buzzing with the usual sounds of childbirth, went completely eerily silent. The nurses exchanged nervous, wide-eyed looks. The doctor cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. Claire's heart dropped. I wasn't white. My skin, my features. It was obvious to everyone in that room. Henry's face, which had been a mask of feigned, fatherly pride, twisted into an ugly snarl of confusion, then rage, then pure unadulterated hatred. He didn't speak a word in front of the hospital staff. He just stared at Claire, his eyes burning with a promise of the violence to come. Her parents stood frozen in the doorway, their faces pale with shock and public humiliation. Their perfect, carefully constructed lie was unraveling in front of everyone they knew. The whispers, the rumors, the scandal started before we even left the hospital. When they got home, Henry's rage exploded. Claire would later say that it was the worst he had ever heard her. She couldn't walk for days, could barely hold me to feed me. He kept muttering, his voice a low, terrifying growl, that he would get rid of the evidence. Accidents happen to babies all the time, he said with a chilling smile. Her parents came by the house and saw her, bruised, broken, and barely able to move. But they didn't care about her pain. They only cared about cleaning up the public mess, about protecting their own reputation in the town. That's when Claire realized with a terrifying clarity that if she stayed, Henry would eventually kill both of us. Still healing from childbirth, her body a roadmap of his brutality, she started planning our escape again, this time with whatever little strength she had left. Then, like an answer to a prayer she was too afraid to speak, Marcus appeared. He came to the house without any warning, a ghost from a life she thought was lost. He didn't explain where he had been. He didn't ask any questions when he saw Claire's broken body, or the baby with his own eyes in her arms. He just looked once at Henry, passed out drunk in the next room, noticed the fresh bruises blooming on Claire's face, and understood everything. He gently picked us up, both Claire and me, and carried us out to his old, beat-up truck. In the passenger seat, Claire held me close while Marcus drove, his eyes constantly nervously checking the rearview mirror. The streetlights and the world changed as we crossed the railroad tracks, from the bright, polished, manicured white neighborhood to the dim, flickering and neglected lights of the other side. His knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, and fresh, angry cuts marked his hands. "Where were you?" Claire finally whispered through her swollen, split lips, his jaw clenched. He told her that Henry found him to be arrested on false vagrancy, charges he had just been released the day before, after spending 30 long days in the county jail. The bruises on his wrists? From the handcuff caught the dim dashboard light as he shifted gears. The sheriff, he explained, was Henry's father's cousin. They had planned it all. Conspiracy to keep him locked away and out of the picture when I was born. When we arrived at a small, modest house with peeling paint, a woman was waiting on the porch, her face etched with worry. Lucille. She rushed down the steps and gently helped Claire out of the truck, her hands firm but practiced, as if this wasn't the first time she had tended to the victims of racial violence. She cleaned Claire's wounds, her face growing more focused, more determined, with every new bruise she uncovered. Claire told her they had to leave town that night, that Henry and her family would be coming for them. But Marcus's truck was nearly out of gas, and he had spent every last cent he had just to post bail. Lucille disappeared into her kitchen and returned with a glass jar filled with coins and crumpled bills, her life savings. They counted it all out on the kitchen table. It was just barely enough for a single tank of gas. No money for food, no money for a place to go. Lucille mentioned a man from her church, a long-haul trucker who was leaving for Chicago at dawn. She had already sent word to him, but they had to make it through the night first. That's when the headlights of a car swept across the front window. Marcus pulled back the curtain, his whole body tensing. It was Henry's car rolling slowly up the drive. They saw him stumble out, a shotgun held loosely in his hand. Claire grabbed a kitchen knife. Marcus started shoving furniture against the front door. Henry began to bang on it, his drunken shouts and threats echoing through the small house. "Give me back what's mine!" he roared. I cried out as the door shook under the force of his fists. Lucille, brave and resourceful, ran out the back door to get help from the neighbors. But through the front window, Claire could see only dark, silent houses. No one opened their doors. No lights came on. No one in that neighborhood was willing to challenge a white man with a gun, not even to protect a mother and her newborn baby. Marcus saw Henry moving around to the back of the house. "Get down," he yelled to Claire. Just as Henry raised the shotgun, a blast shattered the kitchen window, spraying glass across the room. Marcus tackled Henry in the muddy backyard, and they wrestled on the ground, a desperate, violent struggle for the gun. Marcus finally wrenched the shotgun out of his hands, but Henry, with a snarl of pure hatred, pulled a small pistol from his coat pocket and fired. The bullet grazed Marcus's shoulder. Just then, a neighbor's dog, roused by the commotion, came barking wildly, darting between their legs and adding to the chaos. Henry, momentarily distracted, backed off, yelling that he would be back with real help. His tires squealed as he sped away into the night. In the distance, the faint wail of sirens began to grow louder. Someone, likely Henry himself, on his way to spin his own version of the story. The sheriff and 2 deputies, all of them related to Henry, pushed their way into the house. Stolen property. Meaning Claire and me. As they shoved Marcus aside, Claire, in a split-second decision, grabbed me and slipped down into a hidden root cellar beneath the kitchen floor. Lucille stood firm, telling the officers that she was alone, just caring for her injured brother. The sheriff's flashlight beam cut through the dark house, its light passing just inches from where Claire crouched with me in the damp, musty darkness. They were about to arrest Marcus for assault when more headlights filled the yard. Lucille's pastor had arrived, and he hadn't come alone. With him were 5 of the church elders, all of them standing silent but strong in the doorway, their presence a formidable, unmovable wall. The pastor, a man skilled in the delicate art of negotiation and de-escalation, spoke of fairness and justice. His words chosen with a careful, strategic precision. The sheriff, outnumbered and now facing a potential community incident, finally reluctantly gave in. He agreed to let Marcus go for the night, but he gave a cold, parting warning. Accidents happen to people who run. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. When they were gone, an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Washington, finally stepped out of her house. She had been watching from her window the whole time and said her conscience would no longer let her stay silent. She brought over a box of her late husband's medical supplies. He had been a doctor for the black community for 50 years. As she stitched up Marcus's bleeding shoulder with no anesthesia, he bit down hard on a leather strap, his body rigid with pain. Washington told Claire that her own son had been lynched for far less than what Marcus had done. As Marcus rested, his face pale and beaded with sweat, Lucille remembered something. Claire had a childhood friend, a white girl named Emma who had married a black man and moved to Philadelphia years ago. After a frantic search, Lucille found an old Christmas card with a return address. It was a long shot, a fragile thread of hope, but it was all they had. Just then another knock, this time at the back door. It was Jerome, one of Marcus's co-workers from the mill, his eyes wide with terror. He had overheard a group of white men, friends of Henry's, talking about teaching a lesson that night. The smell of kerosene still clung to his jacket. He had walked past them as they were preparing their torches. Henry had gathered his mob, just like her own family had done months ago. But this time it wasn't just about one man. They were coming for the entire neighborhood. Jerome's wife, Patricia, came in behind him, her arms laden with food and blankets. She brought an offer that no one had expected. Her brother, who was currently in prison, had a truck hidden in their barn, the tank full, with extra gas cans stashed in the back. As flames appeared in the distance, a slow, steady line of torches heading towards them like a swarm of fireflies filled with hate, Claire insisted on one last, desperate act. She wanted Marcus to go back to her parents' house to retrieve her great-grandmother's ring, hidden inside her childhood doll in the attic. It was the only valuable thing she had left in the world, the only thing that could buy their freedom. Marcus refused at first, but she made him memorize the hiding place. Just as he was about to leave, Jerome's daughter Mary came running in. She worked as a maid for a white family near the sheriff's office and had overheard Henry filing official kidnapping charges against Marcus. Time was running out. Patricia then made a chilling, heartbreaking suggestion they should stain Claire's skin and mine with walnut juice to temporarily darken us. If they were stopped, they might be able to pass as a black family and avoid the immediate vile a mixed-race couple would attract. Claire wept as she applied the dark, sticky juice to my face, every stroke feeling like a betrayal of the very truth she had fought so hard to protect. But she did it. Marcus returned within the hour, his face tight and pale. He had the ring, but he also brought terrible news. While sneaking through the back of Claire's childhood home, he had seen her mother. She was abandoning her daughter, running off to Atlanta to escape the scandal, ready to pretend that none of it had ever happened. As the church bells rang at midnight, signaling the approach of the mom, Mrs. Washington revealed her final greatest secret. Her root cellar was connected to the town's old storm drain system, an escape route her husband had built years ago after their own son was killed. She led them to the hidden panel. Claire bundled me in layers of waterproof cloth, and they climbed down into the narrow, damp, and cold tunnel. They followed Marcus through the cold, knee-deep water, the smoke from the burning houses above drifting in through the metal grates, choking the air. They finally emerged behind an abandoned cotton warehouse, where Jerome was waiting with the truck. Claire changed into a stolen nurse's uniform that Mary had brought, and they sped off into the night, driving on back roads with the headlights off. At a checkpoint at the county line, they were almost caught. A deputy, tired and wanting to avoid drama, was about to wave them through when Henry and Claire's grandfather pulled up, shouting about a kidnapping. The deputy, annoyed by their drunken belligerence, waved Claire and Marcus through just to get rid of them. 3 miles past the county line, Claire collapsed into sobs, the terror of the last few days finally spilling over. At a small deserted gas station, the owner, a kind elderly man, filled their tear money. "Just get your family safe," he said, a small act of humanity in a world gone mad. The truck radio crackled with reports of a Negro uprising in their town. 3 people dead, white woman still missing. Henry's story, his lie, was becoming the official historical record. The truth was being erased. Then, Marcus saw it in the rearview mirror, a dark, unmarked sedan that had been following them since they had crossed the state line. In a moment of desperate improvisation, Claire told him to turn towards Memphis. They abandoned the truck behind a quiet Baptist church and split up. Claire, with me wrapped in a bundle of laundry, boarded a crowded city bus, praying that the skein on my skin would hold, that the sedan had followed Marcus instead of her. At the Memphis train station, she used the money from the ring to buy a northbound ticket to Philadelphia, to Emma, to their last fragile hope. On the platform, she saw him. Marcus, he had lost his tail in the crowded, chaotic streets of the city. They boarded the same train but in different cars, a painful but necessary precaution. Claire sat in the colored section, her heart a tangled mess of fear and hope. 20 hours later, the train rolled into Philadelphia's towering 30th Street station. Emma's house, on a quiet tree-lined street, felt like it opened the door, and without a word, her eyes taking in Claire's bruised face, Marcus's fevered, trembling body, and the baby in her arms, she pulled them inside. Her husband, James, a doctor, immediately began tending to Marcus's infected shoulder wound. That night, for the first time in days, they were clean, they were fed, and they were safe, but the peace was fragile. The next morning, Claire saw him, a white man standing across the street with a long-lens camera, a private investigator who prowled integrated neighborhoods, selling information to Southern families looking for their runaway relatives. Henry knew where they were. Emma's pastor, a man named Reverend Williams, had been helping families like theirs escape to Canada for years. But the price was steep. It often meant permanent separation from everything and everyone they had ever known. Then, a woman from their church, a woman named Ruth, who had just lost her own newborn baby the week before, made an offer that was both a miracle and a sacrifice. She still had the baby's papers. She still had breast milk. She could take me as her own, travel with a church group to a revival in Canada, and claim that I was her child. That night, with her hands shaking and her heart splintering into a million pieces, Claire kissed my forehead one last time and placed me gently into Ruth's arms. "Sometimes love means holding on," she whispered, her tears soaking my cheeks. "Han, sometimes it means letting go." The next evening, with the sheriff's cousin and 2 hired thugs in tow. But when they stormed the house, they found only Claire and Marcus. No baby? No evidence? Nope, without me. His mixed-race child, his leverage was gone. His power had collapsed. He couldn't prove adultery. He couldn't legally force Claire to return. He spat at her feet and left his face a mask of impotent rage. 3 long, Claire and Marcus lived in the shadows, saving every penny for immigration lawyers. Finally, the approval letter from Canada arrived. A month later, they stood on the dock in Philadelphia, preparing to board a ship to Halifax. As the ship pulled away from the shore, they looked back at the country that had tried to destroy them, their hearts heavy with the sacrifices that had been made, but also light with the hope of a new beginning. 2 weeks later, in the bustling immigration office in Toronto, a woman was waiting for them, holding the hand of a small, curious little boy who didn't remember the woman who was now running towards him, her arms outstretched, her face a beautiful tear-streaked mess of joy and relief. But when Claire swept me into her arms, the scent, the heartbeat, the voice cracked with an emotion I couldn't name. I knew her. Marcus's strong, gentle arms wrapped around us both. After years of running, of hiding, of sacrificing, our family was finally miraculously whole again. In Canada, our love wasn't a crime, my existence wasn't a scandal, we were just a family. And for the first time in the cold, clean air of a new country, we were free.